after that little bit of review, okay, this is estimating irrational numbers. Okay. All right. It'll get brighter in a second. Okay, so let's start with, we already understand what an irrational number is, right? Would the square root of 26 be an irrational number?
Yes.
All of you say yes. Why? Because it's not a what?
Perfect square.
Okay, that's the only kind of irrational number I want you to think about. Okay? Think in terms of perfect squares and numbers that are not perfect squares. Would radical 49 be an irrational number?
No.
Why? One person said no. Why? Because it's what? Perfect square. Would radical 81 be an irrational number?
No.
No. Would radical 50 be an irrational number? Yes, because 50 is not a what? Even though there's lots of factors of 50, 50 is not a perfect square, right? Okay, very good. So this first part, okay, well, first of all, does anybody know what this word means? Truncate. To truncate? Okay, write that down. To truncate a number, okay, it's not the same as rounding, okay? Because you don't want to round an irrational number because it makes it seem like it's rational. When your pencil moves, it helps you write stuff down. Michael, yeah. Okay, good. So truncate. So truncate basically just means, do irrational numbers ever end? No, if I was to find the square root of 3 in my calculator, it would end on my calculator. Why? Because it's the end of the screen, right? Okay, your calculator screen only goes so far. It keeps going. Okay, so what you do with those kind of numbers is you truncate them. It's not the same as rounding, but this number, for example, 3.45555, this keeps going on forever. I could truncate this by just saying 3.45. Basically cutting off the numbers, right? Okay, and it can be truncated to the 10th, can be truncated to the 100th. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So let's look at, okay, first, if we're going to estimate a square root to the nearest integer, okay, I'm going to take this one and we'll look at this, okay? If I'm going to estimate a number to the can I erase this first part? Okay. Nearest integer. Now, square root of 83. Okay, first of all, nearest integer. What does that mean? What's an integer? Does that mean I'm going to have a decimal in my answer? Does an integer have a decimal, people? No. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to estimate this to the closest integer. So what does that mean? Well, here's what I'm going to do when I see a problem like this. Okay, I'm going to list the two closest perfect squares. Okay, what's the closest perfect square that's less than 83? Everybody, what's the closest perfect square less than 83? 81, right? Okay, agreed? What's the closest perfect square that's higher than 83? 100. Good. Okay. Now, what is the square root of 81? What's the square root of 100? 10. Now, this 83, okay, it's said to estimate this to the nearest integer. Well, is it closer to this perfect square or to this perfect square?
9.
It's closer to 81, right? Yeah. So if I was going to estimate the square root of 83 to the nearest integer, what's that going to mean?
9.
It's going to be about what? 9. Okay? Does that make sense what we did there? That first part's not hard. Okay? Let's try another one. You guys try this one on your own. Okay, if you were estimating this square root to the nearest integer, okay, the square root of 54. Okay, let's just think about this for a second. What's the closest perfect square less than 54? 49. What's the closest perfect square higher than 49? Higher than 54? 64, right? Well, what is 54 closer to? 64 or 49?
49.
What's the square root of 49? So what would this be? The closest, nearest integer perfect square for this would be what?
About 7.
About 7, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so next part, we're going to add a decimal to that, okay? Nearest tenth. Okay, so let's go back to this one, okay? And instead of the nearest integer, this now says what? Okay, the nearest tenth. Well, what does tenth mean? That means some number, we'll say some number, point, and then some other number, right? One place. Okay, so let's go back. What's the two closest perfect squares? This is a little tricky, so you got to be careful here. What's the two closest perfect squares? 81. What's the highest? The one higher? 100, right? Are you with me? Okay, what's the square root of 81? Square root of 100? 10, just like what we did last time. Okay, now, if it was right in the middle between 81 and 100, what would that be?
9.5.
No, not between 9 and 10, between these perfect squares. What would that be? If I was about 90 probably, right? 90 would be 9 away from this one and 10 away from this. That's pretty close, right? So if it was the square root of 90, and I was estimating, what would that be as an estimate with the rounded to the nearest 10th? 9 point what? 9.5. So we know this is closer over here to what? To 83. So what do you think would be a good estimate? Would 9.3 be okay? 9.3 would be where? Kind of between these, right? Mm-hmm. Which would be between 81 and 90. Well, that's around 85, 86, right? Do you think that would, what is 83 really close to? 81. So what do you think a good estimate to the nearest tenth would be?
9.2.
Probably 9.1, 9.2. Okay. I would probably say around 9.1 or 9.2. Okay, and the reason now, Jane, you said 9.4. The reason it wouldn't be 9.4, this is 90 here, right? If it was like the radical 89, that might be about 9.4, right? Okay, does that make sense what we did? You just kind of got to think about where it's going to lie. Okay, you're not going to get an exact answer, but you should be able to get something close. Make sense? Jordan.
So in order to find like 9.1 and 9.2, it's like you find that in between the 81 and 100.
Well, we find the middle point. Okay, look, what I mean by that. If I was to say, let me show you another one, okay? If I was to say, find the nearest perfect square, let's say I said, find the nearest tenth, and let's say this was 105, okay? What are the two closest perfect squares to this?
100.
100 and what? What's the next one? 121, right? What's the square root of 100? 10. Square root of 121 would be what? 11. Now, if this was right in the middle between these, what would that need to be? If it was between 100 and 121? Around what? Around 110. Okay? Now, 110 would be about 10.5, right? Well, where is this 105 right between what? Is it right between these?
Yeah.
So it's between these. What's that going to be? About what?
10.3.
10.2 or 10.2 or 10.3. Yeah, but it's only the 10th. Okay? Does that make sense how we found that?
Yes.
Okay? All right, so remember, are you going to get an exact answer here? What is the key word here? It says estimate. When you're estimating, okay, you're going to have to get close to it, okay?
Can you leave that up there?
Yeah, I can leave it up here for a second. Are we good?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, so you can go any more than 0.2. So you can go like 0.25.
Because it's the 10th. So you could just say 10.2 or 10.3.
So that'd be
So technically, if it was 10.25, it would round to 10.3. But either one of those would be okay. All right? Okay, so let's look at this one. Okay, if I'm going to estimate this one to the nearest tenth. Okay. Square root of 46. Yes, it's an irrational number. Okay, you should be writing this down. Okay? And I want to know what you get. When you get an answer, raise your hand. What did it say was radical 46? Okay, so somebody help me. What's the closest perfect square less than 46? 36. What's the closest perfect square higher than 46? Okay, now this one's different. Why? What's square root of 36? 6. Square root of 49 is 7. This 46 is closer to what?
49.
It's closer to this one, isn't it? Okay, if it was right between them, what might that be? Around 40, probably 43 or 42. Okay, but it's kind of closer to this one, isn't it? So what do you think a good estimate might be? Is it going to be bigger than 6.5? Why? Because 6.5 would be right between these, right? And that would be the, if this was like 42. Okay, well 46. What is a good estimate?
6.8 or 6.7.
I would say about 6.8 or 6.7. How many of you guys got that for your answer? Okay, good. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yes, Levi.
Will we have homework on this thing? So do we have to do like both the numbers we would do, or just check them?
Either one is probably fine. Okay. Now your homework will show you how to do this on a number line. To me, how many of you think this is easy? Just find the two closest perfect squares. This is easier than writing out a number line to me. Okay. All right. Are we good on that? Okay. Look at the next part now. This next one. Okay. Cube roots. Okay. Now, what's going to come in very handy when you're doing cube roots? What's going to come in very handy? Your chart, okay? You guys have your chart? Where's your chart? Here's your chart. Okay, so let's look at this one. This says cube root. First of all, does this say to the 10th? This says to the nearest what? Integer, okay? So we have the cube root of 320 to the nearest integer. All right, so let's try this one. Cube root of 320, and we're going to estimate this to the nearest integer. Okay. Do you think I'm going to do this any differently than I did perfect squares? What are the two closest perfect cubes?
Yeah, can I take this?
Did you already get one?
No.
Oh, there you go. What are the two closest perfect cubes? 3 what? The one what's the closest perfect cube that's less than this? 216. And what's the closest one that's higher than that? Okay. So these are quite a bit they're pretty far apart, aren't they? Right? So what would kind of be right in the middle of these? Maybe like 280, 290? Okay, we can just say around 280 because we already know that this is closer to what? Closer over here. What's the cube root of 343? 7. What's the cube root of 216? So we know it's somewhere between 6 and 7, and we know it's higher than what? 6.5. So this is 20, this is 40 away. I don't know. What do you think a good estimate for this one is? 6.7, 6.8, probably about 6.7 or 6.8. Oh, wait. But that's not what it says, is it? Sorry. If this said the nearest 10th, that's why Stella was looking at me like, what's wrong with you? Okay. Which one is this closer to? So what's going to be a good for the perfect or most nearest integer? About 7. That was easier than we thought, wasn't it? Okay. All right, try this one.
Wait, can you leave that?
Yes,
So
I
it's
can.
just what it's closer to?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Are we good? Everybody got it?
I'm good.
Okay. All right, try this one, please. Okay, cube root. You guys do this one on your own. cube root to the nearest integer? Oh, guess I gave it away. Did anybody see that?
Yeah.
What is it? 5. Why? What's the cube root of the closest cubes are what? 64 and 125. 64 is how far from 100? 36, right? How far from 100 is 125? So which one's it closer to? 5. Okay, good. All right, what about this when we truncate? Okay, let's look at a number like this. We're going to estimate by truncating. Okay, so Wyatt wants a fence to square in a portion of his yard to make a play area for his new puppy. The area covered is 2 meters squared. How much fencing should he buy? Now, if this is a perfect square, is this a perfect square?
Yes.
Yeah. This is a square, right? Which means this times this is going to be this, right? So we need to find the square root of 2. Well, what do you think we're going to do? How can we find the square root of 2? Truncate it. What do you think? What are the 2 closest perfect squares? 1 and what? 4. What's the square root of 1? 1. Okay, let's go back to this. Okay, we're trying to find estimate the square root of 2. We're going to truncate it, which means basically truncate means just cut it off. Let's just say the hundredths place. Okay, so we have the square root of 1 or the square root of 4. Square root of 1 is what? 1. What's square root of 4? 2. What would be right between the middle of these? Probably like 2.5-ish, okay? So right between these would be 1.5. So is this going to be closer to this side or this side?
1.
So what would we say? 1.2 or 1.3, right? Okay, it's kind of the same thing. We can just say about 1.3 would probably be good enough for that.
Why would you get 1, 2.5?
It's kind of right between. It's
Oh.
1.5 away from 4 and 1.5 away from 1.
So,
Okay.
what happens because how'd you get the 0.3? Because if it's 2 and the middle is 2.5.
But that's the square root of that.
Oh, I get okay.
Okay. All right. So, are we good on this? Yeah.